We'd like to call to order the meeting of the Livingston Parish Ordinance Committee for February 28th. Miss Angie, would you call the roll, please?
Okay, Mr. Mack?
He's not here.
Mr. Harris?
Here.
Mr. Watson?
Here.
Mr. Talbert?
Here. Okay, item 3A was discussion of speed bumps and criteria for allowance of said speed bumps. And the person who's most interested in that is not here. So we're gonna move past that. We might revisit it later, but right now we're gonna move past that.
We need to pass something while he's not here.
3B, digital file distribution requirements. This was brought to us, because there was some fire departments were concerned about, access to, plans. And with some research, we actually have an ordinance that requires this. And in discussing with Mr. Harrell, he recommended that we make a change in this ordinance to go from 30 calendar days to 1 or 2 was his recommendation. And basically, here's what it is. The ordinance says this is, commercial building operations, material operations. In section 2 requirements on A2, it says any new commercial building / operations, including those required to submit tier 2 reporting to the state. It says see Title 33, Part 5, Subpart 2, Chapter 101, and Summary of Right to Know Law. Must submit the required floor plans, layouts to the Livingston Parish Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness no later than 30 calendar days prior to the beginning of business operations. So basically what it amounts to is supposedly, under the ordinance as it exists now, if you're calling for a final inspection, you should have submitted an electronic PDF to Homeland Security 30 days prior to your theoretical inspection for your final operating permit. There's been some concern in discussion about this, that, people are gonna wanna, get their final inspection and they've not gonna make this submission. And Mark's concern was that 30 days prior, I might not have the most accurate as-built that I could have if we waited till a couple days before the inspection. So that was one recommendation that he had. The other thing he wanted to be sure is it came in as an electronic file, not a paper set of plans. Because the purpose of this is he would then put those plans on Virtual Louisiana so that any emergency responder, fire department, police department, whatever, could then pull those plans up at any point in time, which his description of Virtual Louisiana was basically a secured Google Earth that would have sets of plans of every commercial business in theory, within your area. So what we would like to do is to make the change to say that they must submit an electronic required floor plan and layout and no later than 2 calendar days prior to business operations.
Yeah, I had the same discussion with him myself. And another reason to want it electronic like that is just say that they have a fire in a commercial building somewhere in the parish, don't know where. But whenever they do the 911, it's gonna pull it up, and it's gonna tell them where the electric meter's at, where the water hookup's at, and the whole bit,
So, and basically what's happening is the reason that brought this discussion originally was, some of these volunteer fire departments were having to go out after the fact and do their own drawings.
Yeah.
And so what we're gonna do is, it's gonna require some cooperation by the permitting department in the fact that, there's gonna have to be a checklist, and when you call for your final, if the fact that Mark's office hadn't notified permitting that they received this electronic, then you're gonna have to wait at least 2 days till you get that thing submitted. But, does anybody wanna make a motion to make those, changes to make sure that the floor plan, go ahead, Eddie, come on in. Come on up, talk, yeah, please, come on, say your name.
Eddie
Yeah, I didn't tell y'all to mute them. Go ahead, Eddie.
Eddie
Sorry
Idell
about
with
that.
Alvin Fairman Associates. Gary, one thing that's going through my mind is I think I know what they're probably wanting, floor plan and a couple other major key things. One thing I might would do is designate what format that you want them in, if you want them in PDF, because electronic could be AutoCAD drawings that you may not even be able to open. And the other thing is, like school plans, that's hundreds of sheets. You know, it could be cumbersome even to have to mess with that. So, not trying to discourage y'all from proceeding, it's just I think that maybe a little more thought and maybe just some refinement. Hey, we want a floor plan, the master mechanical, electrical, and that's it. You know, building sections and elevations, I don't, just, you know, it's the first time I've heard that they were talking about doing that, and it's just something to,
Yeah, see, it's been on the books, it's just something that's not technically been enforced.
yeah,
You know
because
what I mean?
we've never done it, we've never.
And so, you know, I guess we need to find out, maybe we could, you know, a better understanding of what he wants exactly.
Because we might could submit 6 sheets that has exactly the information and not a bunch of fluff that they don't even know.
Okay,
You know,
so-
then it would be cumbersome for the.
So your concern is actual, what do they actually need?
Right,
You know, what are
And
you
then-
actually looking for? Because some plans could be overly cumbersome.
yeah, like a set of school plans, we're working on 2 right now, they are gonna be 300, 400 sheets in that set of plans, so.
Okay.
To sit down and try to find what you're looking for could take,
And the format too.
right, the format, I'm assuming.
I'm
probably
thinking
PDF.
that in our conversation, we talked about PDF because
Yeah.
I think it's pretty readily available, you know, everybody can basically. open
Right,
it.
anybody can do it in PDF,
Everybody's got, what is it, Adobe that opens a PDF
Uh-huh.
file, basically, so, you know, it's not.
but that's just a thought.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, maybe we need to, we can talk about that. I think we're all in agreement that we need to identify that the file's electronic. We definitely need to limit the number of days.
Right.
So maybe we'll, another conversation with Mark over the telephone and we'll get an idea of exactly what he's looking for. Maybe we can introduce that. Or maybe at the next meeting, we'll have a more defined, maybe ordinance that we can go ahead and submit to Sandy ahead of time. And then we can talk about it at the next ordinance committee. We know what we're looking for now, we just need to identify exactly what
Right.
part of it we need. Y'all wanna move on to 4A is to amend section 1 and recommendation of amend section 1 mosquito abatement district 2 and 3 ordinance by modifying district 3 boundaries. I don't know if y'all realize, last Sunday, Scooter called me asking about what we're gonna do with people that lived inside the city limits of Denham Springs that were in the mosquito abatement district. I didn't realize we had anybody in District 3 that resided inside the city limits, so my immediate reaction was, we don't need both of those people don't need to vote or pay a fee when they're already receiving a service from the city of Denham. So, we made some inquiries Monday, but we were somewhat limited Monday because it was a holiday. But the attorney that's handling the election for us, made some inquiries on Tuesday morning, and we found out that we had, you know, enough time to correct this. Mr. Idell at Alvin Fairman's office kindly, you know, corrected our boundaries for us, and we got those over to the attorney, and a new ordinance was written. And basically, what this ordinance does is just modify the boundaries of the mosquito abatement district to take out the section north of Cockerham that resides in Council District 3 and also resides inside the city limits of Denham Springs. Y'all all have a copy of the ordinance in front of you. And you've got, I think you can kind of see the outline. There's a map. You see that section at the bottom of Council District 3 on the bottom left that's got the blue diagonal marks through it. That's the section that resides in District 3 and in the city. And I talked to the mayor about it. We originally thought that, you know, the district could administratively remove them, you know, after the fact, but the recommendation from the attorney was, since we had time, if we could remove them before the election, that would be best. So does anybody want to make a motion on this ordinance to send it to the council with the recommendation one way or the other? I mean, it's
Yeah.
people that reside inside the city of Denham that are already receiving service, so
Right.
it seems ridiculous to, subject them to another fee on something they're already receiving now.
And I had mentioned that to Mr. King. I said that at the last council meeting, that was a problem, and he told me that they just gonna spray twice and charge them twice.
Well, I guess some of us didn't understand that exactly, and so we're gonna correct it. The board passed or had a resolution, last Wednesday requesting that this happen, the mosquito abatement board. So, it's all been drafted up, it's all legal. If this council introduces it tonight and passes it at, 2 weeks from now, then there's time to, get it signed and get the boundaries amended and the precincts corrected. We've talked to Jason, we've talked to, Jared, everything's fine. We just need to get the introduction tonight and the ordinance passed in 2 weeks, and it'll all move forward.
That's in your district, John, which one?
Well, it's not, it's Scooter's
It's in
district.
Scooter's district in my
Well,
district.
But the
the
city
city-
limits
Yeah,
is,
the
yeah,
city
right,
limits.
and I spoke with the mayor as well, and, this was actually shrinking the size of the mosquito district, which I'm in favor of that. So, I would be inclined to support this of getting rid of that section. However, if that section, I don't know why you chose to do it now, when I thought you knew about it earlier. Other than that, these people might tend to vote no and
Well,
kill the
I
whole
mean,
thing.
I didn't know about it earlier. I mean, I found out about it. I'm gonna tell you, I found out about it when he sent me a text on that Sunday night, so.
Okay, well, I'll make a motion that pull that out because, even if it, if it does pass, then at least the people inside the city limits won't be having to pay twice.
Right.
Are you concerned that if you left it in and they get sprayed twice, that they're having overexposure to mosquitoes?
Yeah, if the city's spraying, they divide the city into quadrants and they're spraying one night, and we're using,
District sprays another night.
and we spray another night, or we spray the same night, then yeah, we're introducing more product into the environment than is necessary. And so, I just felt that, and there was no need for somebody whose tax dollars are already providing them a
Right.
service. There's no need for them to get charged to get double the service.
So I move that we accept the new boundaries,
So we got a motion by Mr.
excluding the city of Denham
We got a
Springs.
motion by Mr. Wascom to accept the ordinances, is send them favorable to the council for the ordinance as written, and a second by Mr. Harris. There being no objection,
Can I just say you were making a recommendation for the council to enter?
Yeah, I'm sorry, yes.
yeah, recommendation, that's right.
Send this to the parish council
Yes.
With a favorable recommendation.
from the ordinance committee, yes.
Okay, item 4B, discussion of the limits of fill material on
Do
residential.
we need to vote or no?
Well, there was no objection, so we didn't have to vote. Nobody was against it, so we just moved forward. Is that fine, Sandy?
Yeah, you can do that if you want to, but
You
Is there any
want to
objection?
vote? I mean, there was
All in
no
favor?
objection. I mean, look, we got a motion and a second. I'm not objecting to it, so I mean, I know what to vote. We can vote. If you want to call the roll, call the roll.
and, yes.
Hey,
Mr. Harris,
Yes.
Mr. Wascom.
Yes.
Mr. Talbot.
Yes.
You got him on tape saying yes.
I was gonna give him a break. I wasn't gonna make him say yes to anything related to mosquito
No,
abatement.
it's okay. It's shrinking the district, okay? I wish it was really small.
Future reference, if somebody ever brings it back up, gotta.
Right, we got it on the record. Look, item 4B, discussion of limits of fill material on residential lots. I know we've all been out here looking, and we've seen the anthills that are growing throughout our parish. I mean, ridiculous mounds of dirt. And there's been some discussion sometime at the council. This isn't gonna be an overnight fix, but I wanted to start the discussion in this committee and present an ordinance that currently exists in Ascension, and we can look for other particular situations. It's gonna be an interesting discussion because we have subdivisions now that have been approved with lots of them that have to have fill, and their little neighbor next door's, at a way lower level. And we've got to address some of those situations. I know on Sherrill Drive, there was some houses recently constructed that are probably 6 foot higher than their neighbor, or 5 foot higher than their neighbor. And it's just ridiculous to try to, there's no place for the water to go other than in their neighbor's yard, the way these things are done. So we need to address that. Plus, as maps change, you know, we've had subdivisions that have, you know, under this ordinance, there'll be subdivisions, if it passes, that'll be approved with fill material in them, and there's a good chance the flood elevation could change again that requires the slabs to be built at a different level. And we need to address putting fill on top of subdivisions that are built with a fill restriction on them already. And so there's a lot that's gotta be considered in this thing, but, I just wanted to open it up for discussion. I know that some of you, I don't know, some of you probably design in Ascension, you know, engineers in here, so have some idea. But for those of you that aren't engineers and are just here because they've got an interest, basically Ascension has kind of determined there's like different sections. Meaning if you've got a lot that's like less than half an acre, then the limit of fill is 36 inches. And there's some small requirements to it, but they're not overly strenuous because they know that you've got a limited amount of space to work with. If the lots get larger than half an acre, the restrictions get a little more strenuous because they talk about how far they can go outside the foundation. It talks about how much space you have to have between the property line and your neighbor. It also talks about compaction at every 12 inches of fill if you don't go into the natural thing. And I'm not sure, how are we addressing that? Eddie, how are we addressing that in the parish now with that?
We really aren't, and you know, we've talked about, you really got two different things. You have the whole field mitigation issue where you putting fill in a floodplain. Some parishes, Ascension, EBR, they require you to provide a cubic yard of excavation for every cubic yard of fill. But this stuff on limiting the depth of fill on residential lots, that's actually something that we hadn't had to deal with yet.
Right.
In fact, we just did some work for a guy in Ascension that faced that very issue. And I hadn't looked at that ordinance, but the feedback that I got from the client was that it looked like he was not gonna even be able to build a house on this lot that he's owned for years. So we need to, you know, that's a whole new issue that, you know, by limiting the depth of fill you can put on a residential lot.
Well, and basically, you still have the ability to put pier and beam or a drop slab or chain wall, but, you know, I mean, I know I know you passed down over, which is not in the parish, it's inside the city. I know you passed down over that River Road and seen, how high is that pile of dirt?
Crazy. And see, prior to 2016, the way you saw that issue, Mr. Gary, was exactly what you were talking about. You had a subdivision that was 15, 20 years old. You had 2 or 3 base flood elevation changes. So 20 years after a subdivision's developed, you got an empty lot between 2 houses that are 20 years old. New FEMA regulations require them to be 4 or 5 foot higher than their neighbors. Can be a huge problem. Recently, what has happened is people were so traumatized by the flood in 2016. Their old house may have been at base flood. They don't care. They want to build to where if 2016 happens again, they don't have to worry about getting flooded. So they're taking it upon themselves to add an additional 6 foot of fill in some cases. So even though FEMA may not require it, the parish currently has no restrictions on how high you can build. So this is gonna be a complicated matter that we definitely want to
I have a
follow.
question. And so I see possibly, tell me if I'm wrong, isn't it a conundrum if FEMA says you have to build this high, but a parish ordinance says you can't?
Then it's an unbuildable lot.
Then it's an unbuildable
Well,
lot.
it's unbuildable to the point if you're trying to put a slab foundation down, it's unbuildable. That doesn't necessarily mean that the lot's not
Yeah,
you
if
can't
you have some
construct.
provisions for pier and beam
Oh, well,
or
I mean,
something,
that's what, I mean,
then-
Ascension does, it
then,
just,
yeah,
I
you
mean, they
could
basically
do it.
restrict the amount of fill to 36 inches. And then, and you can build on top of that any way you want to, but they just limit the amount of fill. And we're not, I'm not even talking, what we were talking about was really not trying to do mitigation within our parish, because there's some areas that mitigation works, and there's some areas that mitigation doesn't work. And you and I have had this discussion numerous times about, there are some areas that mitigation actually will improve, but there are other areas that, you just need to improve the canals within them to the drainage type situation. So what we're talking about, I wasn't even trying to look at mitigation as, we're not trying to create a zone where that 3 foot comes. We might talk about that in the subdivision part later. If you're developing a big tract of land, that you might be able to bring the dirt from on site. But on these individual lots that we're getting, we need to address that in some way, shape, or form, because I've seen it in my district. I mean, you can go on down 1019 at Charade Place and just look at what's happened to those people on those lots that came in at a different flood, base elevation. And it's terrible to see a house that much taller than the neighbor, and the fact that,
In Plantation Estates is a prime example, after 83 flood, then they raised the level up higher. And one problem that we had back then was everybody, all the neighbors was raising sand because all of the water was running off of that house and into their yard and flooding them. So that's something else we gotta look at,
Yeah, the internal subdivision issues with, like we were saying, an old lot that now somebody wants to build a house on between two older homes that are 3, 4, 5 foot lower. You can address that with other means besides just, you could say, hey, you're only allowed to build a maximum of 1.5 foot above base flood or something, because there are some cuts on your flood insurance rates. You get a little bit higher above base flood. But you could, put in there that, hey, you have to be a minimum of, you can't have any field placed within 10 feet of the property line.
which I think, and that's,
So that they could provide for some little ditches down the property lines to intercept any of their water and take it to the front and to the back. You
So
can do
within
some
10 feet, your mound has to be back flat.
To natural
To
ground
natural
before
ground.
you get to, say,
Within 10
5 or
feet.
10 foot of the property. 10 foot
Does that
really
affect
would be,
how high you go? Does that determines the slope?
well, then they.
Can you
well,
do it either way?
What they might would have to do is, like Gary was saying, a chain wall type construction where you really don't have any dirt against the perimeter of your slab. It's just that, your finished floor may be up here and you have a brick ledge that goes all the way to the ground.
I see what
Cover
you're saying,
that.
yeah.
So you can do some things like that and stay 5, 10 foot away from the property line to help those things.
so, I mean, there are ways to do it. I mean, I think that's kind of, I just wanted to get the initial discussion out there, because there are some, I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm scared to death of field mitigation to a certain extent, and I've watched the debate in Ascension, and look what they've talked about, is that you could take vast corridors out, of the ability to develop. And some of them could be commercial corridors, and that's what, we're not trying to kill development, we're not trying to restrict development in the parish.
Yeah.
We're trying to make smart development, you know what I'm talking about? And so consequently, we're trying to look at what avenues that there are to protect the people that are here, that are already residing in our parish, and still allow the landowners that want to develop, but develop in a means that makes more sense. And so,
See,
even
you can-
though you might think that we're restricting, we've built camps all along the diversion on pier and beam in different places, and not filled. We could have filled those in, but it was acceptable in those camps to build them on pier and beam. Now we need to look at, if you're in an area that requires a bunch of fill, you might need to start considering putting your home on a pier and beam, or at least put a chain wall foundation around it.
And one thing you could consider too is possibly, you could say, hey, if you can have more than 3 foot of fill on a residential lot above existing grade, then they gotta prepare a drainage plan to show that they're not gonna have their fill right up to the property line. It may require they put in some little swell ditches so that they don't adversely affect their neighbor. So you can do something like that too, you know,
I
to
think
help
if-
mitigate that problem.
If all y'all will look at Exhibit A, I had passed, it's about 3 or 4 pages deep down in this thing. That is that PDF that Ascension, that's the PDF that Ascension, it's labeled as 4B, Exhibit A, 4B there. Back a couple pages, and that outlines what they, I just wanted to present one, to just show y'all one, and let's get the discussion moving on what we need to do as a parish to try to, we've done some things, but there obviously, if you listen to your constituents, that seems to be, roads and drainage seem to be the two hot topics that we have. And roads we're dealing with the best we can with the resources we have, but drainage are things that we can look at improving and stopping situations in the future. I know everybody's got them in their district. I have some in my district, y'all have them in your district, that there are areas that are problem from sins of the past. So if we can start addressing some of these problems that are gonna cause people in the future issues, the better off we are. So,
I'm getting calls from some developers that, they want to know how it's going to affect them in their building. I mean, just say they got 200 acres of property out there and they want to develop it. I mean, they need to know something before they ever buy this land and start developing it about how high the dirt's got to be.
I hear you. And so, that's kind of why I said this isn't gonna be overnight. This is gonna be a long, drawn out, a process, to look at everybody's concerns in this thing. It's not something that's gonna happen overnight. I think we got a person sitting in the audience that can speak highly to how long it took to get the process done in their parish back in the day. Come on up, sir.
I went to a meeting the other night, and they facing the same thing, they're talking about the same thing. I met with the parish president yesterday, he said, I don't know about this field ordinance, they're trying to decide 2 feet, 3 feet, or if a developer, develops and they put a retention pond, there need to be a clause in it, whereas every so often they need to go and dig that retention pond out, because what happens is the dirt, people build, when they build a new house, they got dirt and it all goes in the retention pond, and the retention pond fills up, and then you don't have anything. So, they're struggling right now with the exact same thing that you're talking about here tonight. So, maybe you all ought to get together and have a committee together and, look at it.
Well,
'Cause
yeah.
basically, in that area, it's the same situation.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. But y'all all know, I don't want y'all, we're not the lone ranger in this thing. Everybody's facing this thing because there's been elevation changes throughout, and we're all struggling with the same situation. So that was the reason for trying to bring the discussion. So anybody else, any other engineers in the house, anybody, property owners, constituents have any interest to say? Morgan, you have any concerns, any interest, any thoughts? I know we've talked about a little bit, we talked about where you even put it in the ordinance.
Yes, me and Natalie actually talked about it, the 3 foot we think should be like the permit offices, because they
Okay.
were the ones that regulate it. The only thing I really kind of looked into, and I don't think it would be a legal thing, but you are going to remove the ability for some people to loan their property out. So if they put it on piers, they will not be, those people will never be able to not have to pay flood insurance if they have a mortgage.
So alomas are only available with slab?
They look at adjacent ground, so if your adjacent ground is not at or above base flood elevation,
You cannot loam
you
it
can't
out.
loam out.
So
Now,
pier beam, you cannot loam out if
No.
the surface is below.
if it is high enough, you can get like a discounted flood insurance, but
Not loan.
you're not gonna ever be able to get a loan.
I didn't know that.
Well, and understand that Loma isn't changing the flood elevation, that's just changing the map design. So I asked all those people in Greystone that got their property loaned out and didn't have flood insurance, and then look what happened to them in 2016. So I'm not sure that Loma, I'm not sure Loma's always a great thing at times, but I think a more accurate FEMA map is way more important than being able to loan me your property out. Am I right or wrong? Does anybody?
Well, you know, the loan, it eliminates the requirement for flood insurance, but, you know, you can still, you know, you can still get flood insurance if you do have a loan.
But there
Makes it
is,
easier to sell your house.
trust me, there is a false sense of security when you think you don't have to have flood insurance. There's no way the government's gonna let me loan my property out and when I really need flood insurance. I mean, that's all, I mean, you know, that's basically what it says is your slab and adjacent property is out the flood zone, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's out the flood zone.
It doesn't mean it won't flood.
That's right.
You're right.
Go ahead, Mr. Gerald.
My name is Gerald Burns. I was, had asked a question, in the hallway about I guess minor subdivisions without improvements that have been approved by this council and homes have not been built on those lots yet. How would this ordinance affect them, as lieu of new ones coming in? Have y'all given any consideration to that?
Gerald, my thoughts are that right now, everything prior to this is a lot. You know what I'm talking about? Meaning that any subdivisions built, approved, whatever in the past are lots. So consequently, the lot restriction would apply to those particular subdivisions. Now, if you built a subdivision and we had a fill restriction after the fact, then I think at that point in time, you couldn't add any more dirt to your property. You know, meaning that if any subdivision, if we wrote an ordinance in the future that dealt with fill mitigation or the amount of fill you could put on a lot, then those lots would be the level that they were would be the level that they're left at. Isn't that typically what's done, Eddie, in that situation?
The vast majority of the time, if they're everybody wants to get those lots high enough to be able to loan them out, so by default, they are above the base flood at that time, but, so you would, you know, most of the time, it's a non-issue. 15 years later, the base flood has gone up by 2 feet. Now, you want to build on lot 76.
Then you're gonna have to change your, see, and I guess, Gerald, the thing I'm trying to say is that right now, we've gotta be able to deal with the dirt coming in old lots. You know what I'm talking about? We gotta be able to put some restriction on them and say that's what it is.
Sure.
Now, a new development that's developed under the new rules based on fill, you know, then those lots ought to be at the elevation they're built in. If the flood, if the base flood changes in the future, I don't know if you, would you really wanna put dirt on them, or would you wanna change your construction method on those houses in those particular
I
lots?
understand that, but my question about what was already approved by the parish, but I want y'all to think about something different, maybe think out of the box, but all this fill that you're putting on these lots to build these houses on, they have to come from somewhere, okay? It's coming from dirt pits or whatever, but I would like y'all to think about, having developers or someone to actually dig the dirt off of side of canal banks in the same watershed and possibly trade mitigation to be guarded so far, instead of worried about the dirt coming in causing flooding. If you dig off of a canal bank in the same watershed, up or down, then you've displaced the water that would have been displaced by the dirt on top of the lot. That if you could possibly consider that, I know that in some instances that has happened, but I'd like to see the parish move to that maybe somewhat and maybe think out of the box a little bit, okay?
Yes.
Okay?
That's a good idea, Jerry.
Any other comment on that? I wanna go to 5, other business discussion of master plan and review committee. Mr. Girlinghouse isn't here, but, you know, there's been, we've had a discussion about this once. I think, you know, there's been some articles written in a couple newspapers about it. We've had some discussion amongst ourselves. You know, there's been talk of, you know, putting a committee, like a 5-person committee together to kind of review the master plan and more importantly, address the zoning issues. Now, y'all have got the Envision Louisiana a part with you, and I think this is the main part that talks about Is this the whole thing, or is this the part that talks about
It
the?
has the table of contents for the chapter on land use, whether it's residential, commercial, industrial, anything by zoning, is in this section.
It's in this section right here. So what you've been what you've been given here is about the land use. Now, I guess any of y'all that have read it realize that they were only really talking about addressing the corridor of the interstate through the center of the parish. And I don't know if y'all noticed, but most of the problems we've been having with discussion about zoning really hadn't resided, it's not limited to that little section. It kind of goes over the whole parish, and we spend a lot of time in our meetings talking about, you know, what can be built next to somebody, what can't be built next to somebody without, and we really have absolutely no control over that if the ordinances are followed. So, I think Tracy's vision, I'm speaking for him, just because we've talked about it, was to put a committee together of, I think they wanted to have the administration have a representative and a representative from the planning and like 3 representatives from the council to sit around and discuss, you know, the implementation of zoning, not necessarily the master plan as a whole, but take the zoning section out of the master plan and look at expanding it within the parish and figuring out the best way to do that and what the cost of implementing that would be. I mean, there's a lot to that in the fact that, you know, once you establish what some property is, the property owner might not be happy with the zoning that they're given at that point in time. And there needs to be a process for which they can appeal, however, you know, their property is initially zoned. There needs to be discussion about how you change zoning, you know, change what, you know, is zoned, let's say rural to commercial or rural to multifamily residential or whatever, you know, types of or labels of zoning that we end up possibly having in the future. So I think there's a lot that needs to go into this, you know, discussion and the recommendations of this committee. But does anybody have any input as to what they would like to see happen?
Well, one thing I'm looking at with zoning is it's not only going to help a resident area with commercial stuff building up right next to it. It's also gonna help the large landowners, farmers out in the parish or whatever, you know. It's gonna protect them as well as the people in a subdivision. That's the way I look at it.
I agree with you, Bubba, because I read some of the comments and I'm amazed at people who think that their property is rural isn't gonna benefit from zoning, but rural zoning's got its own restrictions. You know, it's got its own restrictions in density and its own restrictions on what commercial can, you know, actually operate on it. So it'll give some of those individuals who have been here before us talking about the shooting range or been here before the concrete plant got built next to their, you know, their piece of property, give them some, you know, some peace of mind and give us some, you know, ability to protect those individuals that we don't have at this point in time.
I have to laugh, and I've even called and questioned this. You go down Juven Road and some more roads out in the parish, they got property for sale. Commercial property. There's no zoning anywhere close to it.
Yeah, but
So how can you say it's commercial property?
Because that's why they get more, they can sell it by the square foot instead of selling it by the acre. Isn't that right, Eddie? You can sell that commercial property by the square foot, where you can sell that residential by the lot or by the acre.
I think some of them they can sell by the gallon.
Oh, well, I hear you. I agree with that. Anybody in the audience have any comment about zoning, one way or the other, pro, con? Come on, Mr. Marshall, it what?
It has a vacuum to it. I was under the understanding that there was already a law that said you cannot divert water from your property to your neighbor's property without correcting that. We're talking about building in dirt. When you haul in dirt, you just filling up the hole and making the water spread out further, affecting more people. you can build homes on concrete slab and not have any dirt underneath them. It might be a little more pricey, but I'm more of the pier person. Put it on piers and let them build the houses that way, because the more dirt you haul in, the more you spread it out. I think the 21 flood didn't go over the 190, but then they built that interstate and hauled in all that dirt, and it filled up where a lot of the water would flood out to, and now it just goes somewhere else. So it's difficult when you got a government that says, bring it in, fill it up, fill it up, fill it up, and they're not thinking about it. And the other thing is, when we build these retention ponds, we're building it where it'll hold water, but are we building it where the water will control the flow into the ditch over a period of time? Or are we just putting a weir and then whenever it gets so full, it flows over? Well, that's not doing anything but making a bigger, it's not really, in my opinion, affecting the movement of the water off in a steady fashion. I know it's difficult. I don't know what the solution is, but I think we need to look at the, like you say, the people that are here, because fortunately, I didn't get flooded. Even though I built 16 inches off the ground. And I'm starting to sit here thinking, well, maybe we ought to think outside the box and have everybody dig the dirt out of their property and build a houseboat on it and let them float with the flood, and the problem solved. But that don't make sense either. So I'm glad I'm not on the ordinance committee.
I'd like to make a comment. You know, I understand everybody's point of view, but in a sense, if I bought a new house in Livingston Parish, I'd want to get on the deal. There's none exist, but I'd want to get it entitled to it. But it wouldn't be fair to the person that helped build Livingston Parish, that's bought land 50 years ago, 100 years ago, has got his house. Yes, my house can stay dry, but again, I'm doing damage to him, and that's not logical reasoning. That's not fair to the person that has a house that's already built, because he can't hardly raise his house.
Right.
And, I mean, you gotta look at this from everybody's perspective, not just the contractor that wants to come in, build retention ponds or canals, build this huge mound of dirt like on Dunn Road, for example. Oh yeah, he could sell the houses now because, it's 10 feet above flood stage. Those people might not never get flooded. But how about all the other people around Dunn Road that's got their houses that built that they can't? So, I mean, we need to be fair to everybody.
But, and I think that's what we're trying to address, is the fact that we have we're seeing now since 2016, all these massive piles of dirt, coming up in our parish, and realizing that all that's doing is causing, harm to our neighbors. And so we're trying to come to a resolution of, how much is too much, and what can we move, what is acceptable, and how can we protect the people that are here without killing development in the future. And so I think that's the goal, and that's what we're trying to accomplish by looking at restricting, fill on some of these lots. So I think we're on the same page. I think that, I think we're just trying to figure out how to address. I think the individual lot thing is going to be easy to work out. I think the problem is, how do you address the big commercial developments and the big subdivisions, and then what are you going to let them do 10 years down the road from that? And I think that's going to be the issue that's going to be hard to figure out. But I think we've at least started the discussion, and we can all go back and think about what we talked about today, and start working on some particular ordinance. What can we do, as to individual lots, and without taking away people's value of their property, without hurting the people that are already here, or the people that might want to do something in the future. And I think that's the problem. If you watch the Ascension council meetings, or any of the Tangible Hope council meetings, or read some of the articles in the paper, I think that's the conundrum that everybody has, is we want to protect the citizens that are here, but we don't want to kill our parish from being able to grow. And we don't want to impact those other landowners that have maybe waited to develop their property, or who have, as people come to them, now have the opportunity to do something with an asset that they've held on to for a long time. So I think we've got to we got to work through all those processes to figure out what's fair. And so that's why the mitigation is gonna come in effect on some of those subdivisions. Where are they gonna get that fill to put in those subdivisions? They're gonna have to look to themselves to, possibly get that dirt to make their property more marketable.
You adjourn?
Any other discussion, any other comment? Looking for a motion to adjourn?
I'll offer that motion.
Motion, Mr. Harris, second the ejection. Thank y'all very much.